All right, well, we have a lot to cover, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first of KMPUD's fire safety seminars. The PUD is hosting these seminars once a quarter in order to help us to become more knowledgeable about fire safety. My name is Ann Oppenheimer, and I'm a part-time Kirkwood resident, and I'm a member of the PUD's Communications Committee, and I'm going to moderate today. We are kicking off the fire safety seminar with a bunch of amazing people who are doing really big things to help educate us and keep us safe. And before I introduce them, I'd like to propose 3 calls to action that you keep in mind while you're listening today. The first is to encourage your HOA to sign up to be part of the FireWise community, which is what we'll learn about a little later on in the hour. The second is to encourage you to start thinking about ways that you can harden your home and create defensible space. And then the last call to action is to continue to support the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. The support from the community has been amazing, and let's keep it up. All right, so today the hour will be divided into 3 segments. First, we're going to hear from Jessica Morse, who's Deputy Secretary of Forest and Wildland at the California Natural Resources Agency. Then we'll hear from Rick Ansell, who's Kirkwood's Fire Chief. And finally, we'll hear from Ann Flor Dwyer, Beth McAllister, and Sandy Goldberg, who will be introducing us to the FireWise program. And while our panelists are speaking, you are more than welcome to type in questions. I will pose as many of them as I can, and I know we're going to have a full hour, so if we have some lingering questions by the end of the hour, Rick Ansell has volunteered to stay a couple of extra minutes to help answer them. The way you type in the questions and answers is go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see Q&A, and click that and type your questions in there. Don't type them into the chat just because that would be easy for me to miss them. I don't want to miss your questions. So in the Q&A, and without further ado, let's get started. We're really lucky to have Jessica Morse, Deputy Secretary of Forest and Wildland at the California Natural Resource Agency. So she is working very hard to restore healthy forests, improve watershed health, protect California's ecosystems, and make California wildfire resilient. Before doing all this amazing stuff, Jessica spent 10 years in national security. Her assignments took her to Iraq, India, and Myanmar. She's a 5th-generation Northern Californian. She's an avid backpacker, and she has hiked over 500 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. So Jessica, thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with us. We're a small yet mighty community, and we're really lucky to have you. So I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you, and just excited to be speaking with you today, because wildfire resilience is really a community effort, and it is going to take collective action for us to get there. But what's exciting is that there are resources and tools available for us to be moving in a direction that is making our community safer and more wildfire resilient. So I want to take a little time today to talk you guys through a little bit of how we got here, what the state is doing, and what tools are available to help us tackle this crisis together. I am assuming that this group is actually fairly up to speed in terms of some of the realities of the wildfire crisis and the dynamics. So I'm going to go over part of that very quickly, just to make sure we're operating on the same baseline. But as you know, we are seeing an incredible surge in this fire crisis, and the community of Kirkwood is living it, right? You had the Tamarack fire on one side and the Caldor fire on the other, and it's unusual for communities at the high elevation to be in the path of extreme fire conditions so early in the year, right? We've been seeing longer and deeper droughts and hot seasons. We saw the snow melt disappear by Memorial Day this year. And so it created dry conditions earlier and made that fire window longer and hotter and more extreme. And so we've been seeing that trend over the previous years. The last 5 years, we're seeing fires over 1 million acres. The Dixie Fire was the first fire that we'd seen that is nearly 1 million acre single fire. And this summer, we saw the first wildfires in California's history cross up and over the Sierra. I think that's probably not profound to all of you, but for the rest of Californians, you know, when you're thinking about the granite of the Sierra is designed to be kind of a very natural and probably the best fuel break there is. And so for this fire to burn up and over granite was pretty remarkable. And so this year we had 3 million acres burn, and it was an extreme fire season. What's helpful is that we know that fire actually has an ecological role on the landscape. And you can see this kind of walking around up in the Sierra where fires burn hot and less hot. A lot of that has to do with the fuel load. There are other factors too in terms of the moisture, the wind, and the conditions. But what we know is that the structure of the forest can actually be established in a way that is fire adapted, because that's what these ecologies were designed to do. Tribes managed with ecological fire for millennia in California, and California's ecosystems are designed for that. So the challenge we have is that these fires tend to gain their own momentum because the fuel load is too dense, and then you get something called ladder fuels, which is where that fire burns up into the tree canopy, and then it has a complete devastation of that forest and that ecosystem. And that will either, and sometimes when it doesn't even burn into the ladder fuels, like you'll still see trees standing with their pine needles on. That means the fire heat signature from all of that fuel was so hot that the heat killed the trees. So when you're walking around in these fire scars, you can see sort of areas where the fire got up into the tree canopy and other areas where the heat devastated the forest. But what's helpful is that we know that areas where we actually have achieved that ecological burn, that forest is then wildfire resilient. So some of you may remember the Caples burn outside of Kirkwood a couple summers ago. It was a prescribed fire. It got really big. It got actually outside of its prescription, but it still burned at an ecological level. It still burned out the underbrush, and that forest remained healthy and standing. When the Caldor fire came up to the Caples burn, it actually went around it. It went around that 3,000 acres of a prescribed fire that had happened. So we know that sort of getting those forests back to their ecological structure is really important to modifying fire's behavior and its intensity, and not only keeping our communities safe, but our ecologies. It's important to remember that we got here today because of both climate change and politics. There was a political trade-off in the early 1900s when the conservation movement came along. It was an incredibly radical concept. Congress at the time hated it, but the Forest Service was established to enforce the conservation movement and enforce this concept and protect public land. Since Congress didn't like the Forest Service, they decided to not fund them. And so Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot made a political trade-off. They understood the ecological role of fire, but they also were facing a political reality of how do we get Congress to fund the Forest Service. So they established a policy of the Forest Service being a fire suppression entity. You may have heard the expression fires out by 10 a.m. or the 10 a.m. rule. The Forest Service's motto was we'll put every fire out within 24 hours. And so that political trade-off really early on led us to a state where our forests became then overly dense and that ecological role of fire was removed. Then once climate change came into the mix, it led us to, it meant that our forests were not very resilient. So this is a picture down in Shaver Lake area in the southern Sierra where we had 169 million trees die from beetle kill, which is a combination of drought and overly dense forests stressing those trees. And we saw high tree mortality. That then exacerbated conditions because those dead standing trees then fell over and became ground fuel. And so rather than having 3-inch diameter wood, you had 30-inch diameter wood. So picture like a bonfire, right? And so that was burning in our forest at scale, and it was creating a heat signature that was so unprecedented. It created, this is the Creek Fire, it created a 50,000 foot pyrocumulus. During the Tamarack Fire, we were all watching the pyrocumulus that owned the weather system that was created by that heat signature from that fire go up into the sky. I think the Tamarack fire was getting about 20,000 feet. This one at the Creek fire was 50,000 feet. Scientists who study this phenomena, which is called standing combustion, where you have that active flame and active heat signature throughout the entire footprint of the fire, to find a real life example at this scale, they have to go back to the Tokyo fire bombings and the bombings of Dresden. So the experience that we are having in our forests is incredibly extreme and daunting. And it's that combination of overly dense forests with extreme ecological weather conditions with climate change, causing these more extreme conditions of drought and longer dry spells and heat waves that's drying out those forests. But I want to give you guys a little bit of hope. Remember that first slide of an ecologically managed forest being able to withstand that fire, having those flame lengths be low? Just take a guess in your mind as to where you think this forest is. All right, I'll tell you. This is in Baja, California. So this is at a much hotter ecozone, but it is a resilient Jeffrey pine forest that is withstanding those hotter conditions because it's been ecologically managed its whole life. So it has had fire come through, it was never clear cut. It had fire come through every 15 years or so, clear out the underbrush. It's at the right density to be able to withstand those climate conditions that it's now facing. And so that's an important lesson for all of us, that we need to get our forests back to that ecological level. What's exciting is that we are starting to really surge in these activities. So over the last 5 years, CAL FIRE and our state funding, the first time we had dedicated funding for forest and wildfire resilience activities was in 2018. And that was about $200 million a year. So you can see our fuel reduction activities, those activities where you're thinning out the forest or putting in those fuel breaks, started to surge after we had dedicated funding for it. And good news, we've got more money. So in 2018, we had $200 million a year. This last year, we just got $1.5 billion for forest and wildfire resilience activities throughout the state to be able to help us adapt our ecologies and communities to the hotter climate conditions we're having so that we can restore fire to its natural ecological role, as opposed to those giant pyrocumulus clouds that are wiping out entire ecosystems and communities. So this money is already starting to have an impact. It came in 2 phases because it turns out the wildfire cycle doesn't adapt well to the budget cycle. So we got an emergency appropriation in April that's $500 million to allow us to get some of these projects that were just on backlog to get them done and out and done quickly. And that included projects up and around South Lake Tahoe that were there in time for the Caldor fire. And then the other billion we got was designed for really making those long time structural reforms so that we can surge over a long period and really hit that higher scale. So that budget is investing across 3 core fronts of wildfire resilience. And this is what we want to see in and around every community to be able to say, hey, when a fire starts, it's going to be fine. And so we're investing across 3 areas. So that the largest area is that landscape scale restoration, where we're thinning out those forests and ecosystems so that fire burns at its natural ecological level, germinates seeds, does what it's supposed to do, as opposed to wiping out the tree canopies and the ecology. The next area is interventions around communities. So these are things like strategic fuel breaks, which is where firefighters can take a stand and get a tactical advantage to modify the behavior of that fire in an active firefight. And then that last area is home hardening and defensible space. So that's the work you guys are doing, putting that defensible space zone around your home and putting those interventions inside of your home to do those home hardening retrofits makes a huge difference. We saw homes built with those in the Camp Fire, which was, again, an incredibly extreme fire. Homes built with home hardening standards had about a 50% survival rate. Homes built without those standards had about a 10% survival rate in the Camp Fire. So even in extreme fire conditions, we're seeing some impact. So I want to talk through each of those 3 levels with you, and then also some of the structural reforms we're doing so that we can create the workforce and the businesses we need to be able to maintain this scale. So that $1.5 billion budget is actually 40 programs across 21 different departments. So it's a whole of government, all hands on deck approach. So one of the biggest things we're doing are these resilient landscapes. So that's where we're going in and using all sorts of tactics, right? From grazing to prescribed fire. Sometimes you have to go in by hand first and then follow with prescribed fire. But this is an example of how that works in action. This is a picture of a project that was done by the Sierra Nevada Conservancy in 2020 or before 2020. And then the North Complex fire hit it in 2020. And as soon as that fire, which was burning at extreme intensity, hit the area where the landscape scale fuel reduction had been made, it actually laid down and burned under the tree canopy. So even where those trees are green, the fire still went through, but it went through at an ecological level because that fuel load had been reduced. So we can see that this can make a huge impact for the safety of our ecology. And again, if we get that fire intensity lowered at that landscape level, that means it's not going to gain that momentum that could then wipe out communities. The next area are these strategic fuel breaks. You have seen these up and around Kirkwood or driving off of up Highway 50. And these are shaded fuel breaks. They are thinned areas of forest. And that's where firefighters stage their equipment. It's also really crucial to have those as evacuation routes. So we had something that we call Fire Adapted 50. It was a community collaborative funded by the state that invested in strategic fuel breaks in and around up and down that Highway 50 corridor from Placerville all the way into the Tahoe Basin. And we saw that come into play. I'll show you pictures right here, actually, of those adaptations coming into play in the Caldor fire. So the color contrast on the slide are a little bit tricky, but if you look closely, there's some brown, sort of that brown overlay is where the fire footprint actually was. That stripped down the middle is Christmas Valley and Myers, so familiar areas to all of you. And the green blocks are strategic fuel breaks that had been put in over the previous decade as a community collaborative done by Tahoe Conservancy, the Forest Service, CAL FIRE, state parks, and the California Conservation Corps. And so all of these groups came together to put together these strategic fuel breaks in and around Christmas Valley. We also saw strategic fuel breaks around Pollock Pines, around Strawberry, in these areas. So in the Caldor fire, which was burning at that extreme intensity, right? This is a fire that was spotting 3 miles in advance of the fire head. So that means it was igniting fires 3 miles ahead of the flaming front. Firefighters on the ground staged themselves in those fuel breaks up and against those communities. And what they saw happen is that the fire burning at a high intensity through that overly dense forest, it was burning at 150-foot flame lengths, which also means that heat signature on it's going to be too hard to approach. As soon as it hit those shaded fuel breaks, right, sort of areas like this that were thinned out areas of trees, it laid down. And they were reporting on the ground sometimes knee-high flame lengths, sometimes 15 feet flame lengths, but it meant that they could actually approach that fire and fight it and keep it out of those neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods had also done a great job on that defensible space and home hardening, which also made a big impact. But this is just fuel breaks in action. And then there's one as a photo below of a fuel break that had been in place in the campfire. And you can see the singeing on the trees. That one actually self-arrested and saved the town of Sterling City during the 2018 campfire. So we know that these interventions work, and our challenge is now getting them to a higher scale, which this budget is now getting us to. So that last area, so we've looked at sort of the impact we can have on the landscape, around communities with fuel breaks. This last area is really crucial for homeowners to take part in, where you are putting in that defensible space around your community so that when a fire comes through, it doesn't have a lot of fuel to burn and create a heat intensity around your home. The fire codes just changed this last year so that we're now recommending a 5-foot non-flammable zone around your house. So that means no plants up under your window, change out those fences from wood to wrought iron, really landscape with rocks and not mulch. So trying to make sure that you're having right against your actual house a non-flammable zone. Because what we're seeing is that homes actually burn from the inside out in a wildfire. It's either the heat signature of something burning right up against the house will burst the windows or get into the siding, or it will be embers in those wind cast embers that are coming into attics, under eaves, in through the vents. So putting in defensible space around homes and communities makes a big impact. This is just a photo of some of the early action dollars in action. We did some defensible space along roadways, along Highway 101, and then also an arson watch program down in Southern California to stop ignitions. And then here's great examples of defensible space, home hardening, and community outreach. We're funding some activities on this front that are helpful for you in particular. We're investing in the UC Fire Advisor program to work with your FireWise communities and your fire safe councils to make sure that they're bringing the best science to bear to the community tools. We also have grants from CAL FIRE that are called fire prevention grants that communities, Fire Safe Council, FireWise communities can apply for to do defensible space chipping, home hardening, putting in those fuel breaks, or whatever your community feels like you are needing to be able to get you over that ledge to get to that home hardening saturation level. Because that's also a really crucial point, that it's important for you to do this work. It's as important for your neighbor to do their work too. That if you have one house that's done home hardening and everyone else around them is just overrun with vegetation and really prone to fire, their heat signature on that is going to overcome any interventions that have been made. So what we want is to make all of the homes unreceptive to embers and fire. And so, because once it goes from a wildland infiltration to a house-to-house, so it's an urban infiltration essentially, the heat level on that's going to be very different and very difficult to stop. There are other investments that we're making too, in addition to projects across those landscape levels, around communities, inside of communities. We're also making sure that these programs and all of these grant dollars are available to be regionally driven. So we invest in a program called the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. In your community, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy is going to be your anchor partner for the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. And so they invest in community collaboratives that give them planning dollars and a staff to be able to help deliver those scaled, comprehensive, cross-jurisdictional wildfire resilience programs. A great example of this in action is down in Pollock Pines. The local resource conservation district was the Sierra Nevada Conservancy's partner, the El Dorado RCD, who I guess you guys would might overlap with a bit. So the El Dorado Resource Conservation District got staffing and planning dollars over the previous years under this program, and they designed a comprehensive strategy and across private land, federal land, state land, and county land. And so they created an entire network of fuel breaks around Jenkinson Lake and up and down Highway 50. And that is why that Caldor fire completely wiped out Grizzly Flats. And then when it hit those fuel reduction areas around Jenkinson Lake, firefighters were actually able to hold it off for about a week out of there and keep it out of the neighborhoods. So we see that the goal of these dollars is to try to empower communities, to give everybody the best science and the best tools to be able to create multi-jurisdictional, cohesive fuel breaks and fuel reduction. Because the wildfire is not pausing just because it's on federal land. So we're also investing in science-based management. So a lot of improvements in terms of spatial imaging, data access, so that we can refine our models, better target what we do where, and also to give us a feedback loop to ensure that the interventions we're taking, whether it's prescribed fire or mastication, is making the impact that we want to see. We're also investing in workforce development. So up in Alpine County, these are grants to programs like the CHIPS program. And that's the program that has been training, the Hungalalti tribe has been a founding member of that CHIPS program. And they saw a 30% reduction in unemployment by having this funding for training and then being the fuels crews out in the community hired by state and federally funded partners. So we saw it's a great opportunity to create a really solid workforce. We're also investing in prescribed fire collaboratives to get more groups that can do prescribed fire on the landscape. We're also doing business development, such as investing in what do we do with these slash piles? So lots of tools around wood innovation. We've got a loan guarantee program and a program that is helping us design pilot programs for feedstock supply chain. So we can get into all of those details in a bit. And the last area we're really working on is making sure that our environmental protection permits are not our obstacle. So we created something called the Cal VTP. It was a 20 million acre pre-environmental review to get CEQA analysis done on all non-federal high fire risk land. So anything that would require CEQA to do a fuel reduction program is going to be covered by this Cal VTP. And the state water boards and the Department of Fish and Wildlife both fully integrated their permitting requirements into this one document and process as well. So instead of that process taking 2 years and multiple permits, we've gotten it down to just an actual boots on the ground environmental analysis, which takes about a month or two, and it gets you all 3 permits. So it's the first kind of 3-for-1 CEQA and single application and very fast process while still retaining environmental quality. So we are just really excited. I can go into details. This is kind of the imaging of that regional forest and fire capacity program I mentioned. And here's a little more on the Cal VTP, but I'm really happy to kind of stop here and take questions and just have a discussion.
Thank you so much. I got the first question right here, asks about dead trees and why not allow more of dead trees to be logged off?
Yeah, so it's absolutely, we want dead trees to be logged off. There's incredibly fast permits to be able to do it. So there's a permit for tree mortality, emergency and exemption permits. They take about 5 days. I mean, so there's not any permitting or state sort of obstacles in the way of removing dead trees. The challenge we're seeing around dead trees is actually the mill capacity and the workforce infrastructure. It's sort of this question of, well, what do you do with them once you get them off? And so that's why we're investing in these programs that are going to, the program called the Climate Catalyst Fund gives low interest loans and loan guarantees to anybody wanting to start a business that is utilizing wood materials. So whether you've got lumber, like trees that are dead but salvageable for lumber, and you want to start a local mill, this can fund that. Whether you want to convert that woody biomass and chip it and turn it into some type of biodiesel or biofuel, this can fund that. I'll actually share my screen one more time and just show you pictures of the this is the problem we're having with the dead trees, right? Is that these slash piles are building up. There's me in the picture there, just as a sense of comparison. But there are 40,000 of those slash piles in the Tahoe Basin alone. So, and we were having to dedicate entire fire engines to trying to prevent those slash piles from essentially igniting like bombs in active fires. So we are really desperately and working hard to create programs that will allow us to move those off and try to find something better than just pile burning them. So a great example is cross-laminated timber. California just changed our building codes to allow up to 18 stories to be built out of these wood beams. So it's compressed wood. It tends to use smaller diameter wood potentially, and it builds up to 18 stories out of them, and it replaces steel and concrete in construction. But even just trying to get things like on the lower corner, a micro mill, right? This would be somebody with a mill at the back of their pickup truck that would help it move. And we also have these pilot programs that I was mentioning at at the governor's business office to try to develop a business sector around this, but also a feedstock supply chain. So the challenge isn't identifying where it is. It's a question of how do you move it and how do you create enough supply guarantee that it can move? Because the state grant dollars until this new budget had about a 3-year lifetime on them, which meant you could do a project and guarantee somebody 3 years of woody material. That is not enough to create a business model around buying $1 million mill or $1 million cross-laminated timber facility. And so we needed longer guarantees. So we're creating these pilots around creating kind of feedstock aggregators, kind of like a middleman that would then sell guarantees of feedstock. They would buy up all the small programs and projects that were happening in and around your community, and then be able to say, hey, I'm going to give you a guarantee of 10-year supply of woody material, and they would then do the legwork to find it. The other thing that we just changed is that all of our grant dollars, most of our grant dollars in this budget, instead of having a 2-year expiration on the dollars, it's now 7 years. So that means that anybody getting our grants could potentially sell their feedstock for 7 years and also hire the contractors they need for 7 years. It also allows them to do entire watershed scale projects so that they don't have to start and stop and reapply for grants throughout this process. So by changing our state business model to accommodate more of the needs of the forest sector, we're making a real, hopefully we'll be seeing a big impact soon.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, let's say the forest management program was fully funded at a reasonable level. How long would it take to provide a basic level of protection?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the Forest Carbon Plan estimated that out of the 33 million acres of forest lands in California, about 15 million acres were in need of intervention. And there's going to be differing levels of fire risk, right? And so what we're seeing is our target is to try to treat with the U.S. Forest Service about 1 million acres a year. We're working on scaling up to get to that pace by 2025. That's our goal. And I think we're there. The question is, like, what's the role of private timberlands? That's 8 million acres of these forest lands in California are private industrial timberlands. And so what's their role in mitigating fire on those lands, and how much of that should count against these targets? And so we are scaling up. The budget that we just released, that $1 billion, that it has programs that kind of, as you saw, like some of them are business development, some of them are science. But in terms of the programs that are just delivering actual vegetation treatment acres, that's probably going to get us about 600,000 acres. So, what we're doing is really scaling up, but we need to scale up further. But the challenge is you can't just throw money at the problem, because if we scaled up much more beyond what we just did, then you're just going to increase the cost per acre if you don't have the people to hire to be able to do that work. So we're trying to scale up the workforce along with the resources to get it done. What we need now is for the Forest Service to be funded at this level. So the infrastructure bill that just got passed quadrupled their budget and resources, which is really exciting. But they had been at about, for California, about $50 million a year for hazardous fuel reduction. So, hypothetically speaking, the infrastructure bill may get them up to 200 million for fuel reduction, but that doesn't get us very far. So we need the Forest Service, which owns 57% of the forest lands in California. We need them to be funded and also scaled at the level to sustain this. And so if the Forest Service matches California's 1.5 billion and brings their workforce along with it, then we're going to be really in business. But this is a long-term process of scaling up. But what's exciting is that we are already seeing these interventions take place. Just looking at the fuel reduction and interventions that have been put in place around Kirkwood, around South Lake Tahoe, around Pollock Pines, that Caldor fire likely would have devastated South Lake Tahoe and Pollock Pines very easily, and Kirkwood, right, candidly, without all of this work that had been done in advance. So even these targeted interventions are having an impact on saving lives. The challenge in front of us is to keep those up at scale, which we're doing, and then also make sure that we're protecting our watersheds. The Dixie Fire is incredibly devastating, right? It was almost 1 million acres, and it devastated the entire Feather River watershed. And so, which is the state water project, right? So that's the headwaters for a large majority of the state's water. And so when that watershed at its entire scale got wiped out, not just a section of it, suddenly we're looking at the watershed's capacity to function, our natural infrastructure breaking down and further exacerbating drought. So this is the trade-off we're facing now. It's like, how much do we focus on reforestation versus green trees? It's a tough debate, but we need the resources to do all of it.
Oh, amazing. I'm going to skip to another question that might pertain, sort of dovetail with what you were just saying. What about the U.S. Corps of Engineers conservation wetlands adjacent on our property or on our property?
Yes, I am not familiar at that level of detail. So maybe one of the local fire chiefs can weigh in.
Okay. How about this one? What is the average cost per acre for forest treatments?
Yeah, about $2,000 an acre.
Oh, wow.
But it's pretty, that's the average. It's pretty variable, right? If you're doing prescribed fire, it's a lot cheaper. And you can cover a lot more acres. If you are doing like hand thinning, right? If you're in an ecologically sensitive habitat, and you have to go in with hand crews, that's going to be like $4,000 an acre. When you bring in the National Guard, it's $8,000 an acre, but they get it done really fast. So.
Okay, here's another, we've got questions pouring in. So maybe we'll take just a couple of more. This next one, how do approvals work for forest treatments depending on whether the forest is federally managed, state forest, or private lands?
That's a great question, and one that I wish I didn't know the answer to. So on state lands or non-federal lands, right? That CalVTP process is our fast track streamline. We have created this process that is designed to make it very fast and easy. I also want to make sure, so that's the approval process. If you're going to do veg management on non-federal land, you've got your CEQA, state water boards, and fish and wildlife permits all in one in this one straightforward application. And now, for anybody who's looked at the CalVTP, it's a 1,000-page document. So one of the things that we added in to this budget was a series of templates to be done by the environmental lawyers who wrote the CalVTP, so that nobody has to try to read it and figure it out from scratch. That they'll have a project already done to model off of that is appropriate for their ecosystem and their community, so that somebody's already gone through and found all the interventions that they'll need to do out of the CalVTP for them. The federal side is harder, so there's a lot of emergency exemptions that allow us to move forward. And we also, Senate Bill 901 from 2018, which did a lot of the foundational work on wildfire reforms, that allowed us to have kind of a CEQA NEPA crosswalk. So we have this kind of waiver that says, hey, if you've done your CEQA, you've got your NEPA. If you've done your NEPA, you've got your CEQA. And so we're working on trying to make that process a little bit smoother and a little bit faster. But yeah, the regulatory environment around this, there's a paradigm shift happening where the fact that the state water boards were willing to create this sort of automatic enrollment permit into the CalVTP rather than saying, go, let's do an extra process. Everybody gets the urgency of the crisis, and that environmental regulations that were put in place initially to protect the environment from people are now prohibiting the environment from being protected from itself. And so we're putting a lot of tools in place to help ensure that we're still retaining environmental standards and protections, but without sort of the odious timelines that they had come with before.
Wow. Well, you are such a font of information. I think we have to have like a 3-hour seminar with you next time. We've got a couple more questions, but I think what we might do right now is just move on to our next panelist and then try to get to questions at the end. So Jessica, thank you so much for all of this. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yes. Now we're going to move on to Fire Chief Rick Ansell. He's been with the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department for nearly 22 years, and he's been our fire chief for 15 of those years. And I'm just going to repeat what a Kirkwood volunteer firefighter said to me. He said, Chief Ansell was a, quote, brilliant chief during the Caldor fire, unquote. So thank you, Rick, for everything you've done to keep us safe and for speaking with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And again, thanks, Jessica, for your presentation. Where you really hit the nail on the head on a lot of points there. And actually, I was going to start my presentation with some of the information that Jessica mentioned. Historically, Kirkwood has always been in a moderate or a low fire hazard sensitivity zone. And with the topography of granite shelves, lakes, natural features, our high elevations, and then along with the Cables Lake Restoration Project burn scar, which was done in 2019, we felt really well protected. And there was an ongoing joke between some of the fire chiefs and the sheriff's departments that, you know, we have the asbestos forest. It never burns. Everything's, you know, we're so high up, we're safe. But lo and behold, we discovered something this year that we've never seen before with the Tamarack fire, as well as the Caldor fire, that we are not exempt, and that we should do everything that we can as a community to help protect ourselves. With the latest weather patterns and fires growing to such a large scale, we as a fire department over the years have been slowly moving our focus from a structure orientation, which is we're protecting buildings and residents in Kirkwood and responding to EMS calls. And, you know, wildland's kind of a nice thing. We've got a truck that can go out there a little bit, but really weren't prepared for it. But with the community support in the last couple of years and the purchase of our Type 6 vehicle, which is a smaller fire truck for those who don't know, we really did start focusing toward the wildland side. It paid off this year with the support from Eastern Alpine County, from Supervisors Terry Woodrow and with Alpine County, and Jeff Brown with Amador County, along with Amador Fire Protection District. We've developed our department to respond to most and all hazards, and especially during the summer. And during the beginning of the Caldor fire, you know, we, like everybody else, you know, we were aware of the fire. We just got off the Tamarack fire, sending a crew down there, our Type 6 engine down to Eastern Alpine County to help and support for a week. And so again, we watched the Caldor fire grow. We initially sent some of our personnel down to assist along the Highway 50 corridor on a strike team out of Eastern Alpine County. And at the same time, we also assisted with the helicopter base here in the Kirkwood area. And some of you are probably familiar with that, where because of our favorable weather conditions, we had clear skies where the fire smoke initially and generally pushed away from Kirkwood, which was a benefit for us, of course. We were allowed to have a helicopter base up here with aircraft coming and going for about 2 days. But then, as you're aware, on August 28th, everything changed. And that's when the fire smoke column pushed over Kirkwood, and we started having raining ash and embers in our area. And so things really did change. And so we remained in place. And again, we learned a lot of lessons during that time. But the biggest takeaways for us were the communication that we gave out to the community. At first, we relied on the Caldor Incident Command to provide public information on what was going on, where the evacuation zones were. As you are familiar, and something that we'll need to work on is, you know, the mapping. Kirkwood's in 3 different counties. And so the mapping for El Dorado is different from the mapping in Amador and in Alpine. And when you're in 3 different counties, at one point, it was kind of funny. It said that, well, Kirkwood was safe, but the fire was near Kirkwood Lake, but Kirkwood Lake area was actually okay. And it was kind of pieced together where it was really a mixed message. Like, should we evacuate? Should we not? Who do we listen to? How do we get the information? And so collectively, it all came together, and through the sheriff's department, things were done right at the right time. But I think in the future, we could work as a community, and the counties can work with us to try to get a better message out quicker and more simplified than what happened during Caldor. So that really was the first lesson we learned. Another takeaway was we had numerous resources responding to Kirkwood from all over the state, essentially all over the West Coast. And we luckily had the fortunate, the fire department's part of the KMPUD, the district. And so we are very familiar with the water supply and the infrastructure and the very important assets in Kirkwood. So us as a fire department, we're able to help those outside resources come in and help protect the Kirkwood Valley and ensure that the two main entrances and exits out of Kirkwood were open, ready to go. For those who don't know, that we do have an emergency access road on the east side of the valley that has an entrance and exit to Highway 88. So we established all those safe zones for the personnel working in the valley. We helped establish the water supply. But Kirkwood being unique and 8,000 feet, over the years, we developed a way of getting water in the middle of winter off a fire hydrant that has a 2.5-inch snorkel on top of a normal fire hydrant. It works great for us. We carry monkey wrenches on our trucks, but the outside resources coming into Kirkwood, they don't carry monkey wrenches. They have a normal hydrant wrench. So again, another lesson taken away from this event was we need to prepare our hydrants so anybody can get water from a hydrant and not have to figure out how to get a monkey wrench or another way to open up a hydrant. So little things like that were learned, and we've taken a lot of notes, and we'll certainly share it with our staff, and anybody who's got questions can certainly reach out to me as well. But those little things take time to work through and manage, and through really face-to-face communications and excellent communications with the counties, we were able to work with everybody to get things done in a timely manner and help protect Kirkwood. So much that Kirkwood Fire was able to go out and help our neighboring areas like Cables Lake Caltrans Station, a very important asset, as you can imagine. And then some of the campgrounds, Kirkwood Lake community area, the Iron Gate area, as well as areas around Cables Lake. So again, I think when it all came together, we came together and made it happen, but it took a lot, and we certainly have a long way to go. One of the important things and surprising things was how much community support we received. And I'm going to have a list of people I'm going to thank at the very end here, but I'm just absolutely amazed and truly appreciate the community support. We've received over $180,000 for our fire department since the beginning of the Caldor fire. And through those donations, we were able to recently purchase a lot of firefighting equipment that is more wildland oriented, as well as other personal protective equipment for our fire department. Our original goal from community fundraising through our 501c3 was to purchase a type 1 fire truck, a traditional looking fire truck. But lessons learned again from Tamarack and Caldor is that we really should think about and consider a smaller truck, a type 2 truck that has the same gallons per minute and water capacity, but is a smaller vehicle able to get into more narrow places. And that way, if we get called out to, for example, the Kirkwood Lake area, we'll be able to initiate an attack and hopefully put the fire out before it gets into Kirkwood. And a smaller vehicle will allow us to do that much easier. So I've applied for numerous grants, and I'll again apply for an assistant firefighters grant this year with the government for another vehicle, but I'm going to focus this request toward a type 2 vehicle. Other grants that we're also going to request are, again, fire prevention grants, as Jessica mentioned. We've applied for those in the past, but as historically, we've got a low population in Kirkwood. Our hazard assessment was fairly moderate to low. And so we are competing for funds throughout the state. And typically those funds are allocated to areas that are fire hazard or have a high fire hazard in Kirkwood. So we as a community need to think about, hey, we can ask for grants and we might get lucky and get one, but really we need to take care of ourselves and really focus on trying to protect ourselves like we always have. But not to say that we won't continue to apply for grants, but it's going to be a challenge. And, you know, again, I know this community will step up and help out when needed. And in consideration of time, because I think the next speakers are really going to hammer in what the next steps will be for our community to work together and again help protect ourselves. But I just want to reiterate the message that was delivered from Lake Valley Fire Protection District as well as South Lake Tahoe is that we need to start thinking about this now. Don't wait till the fires at our doorstep to create and maintain defensible space around our properties, our infrastructure, our buildings. And as Jessica mentioned before, you know, the dispensable space information is out there, but that first 5 feet of dispensable space next to your home and thinking about flying embers and protecting our structures and our buildings from those is really key to helping the firefighters protect your home. So again, hardening your home as best as possible. Don't rely on the fire department to be there and sitting in your driveway waiting for the fire to come and help protect your driveway. Though some insurance companies had private firefighters up here doing defensible space around homes that they insured, but when it's down to the wire and we're running around trying to put things out and the fires again at our doorstep, the more that we can do to prepare ourselves as well as our structures, the better we will be collectively. So we'll be really educating and enforcing the need to really protect our community way out in front and not when it's the last minute. And then the last thing I really want to talk about for that message from the Tahoe Basin is that being prepared and staying educated and being well informed. And we'll work again closely with everyone to try to communicate this out much better in the future so we have more time to prepare for in the event of the fire. I cut out about 5 minutes of my speech and the PowerPoint, so I'm sorry about that. But I do want to thank again the community for their generous support. I especially want to thank some of our volunteer firefighters, my whole volunteer fire department, including Captain Tom Harris, Chief Terry Hughes with Eastern Alpine County, Chief White with the Amador Fire Protection District, Rob Bicker with Caltrans, and Billy Newman with Caltrans. All these people were key and very important players during the event, during the 10 days that we were here alone protecting Kirkwood, along with the county supervisors, CAL FIRE, Forest Service, CHP, and I'm probably missing numerous others. But again, I think going back to the top, the community and the support from the community was just amazing, and we truly appreciate it and thank you. So with that, I open up to any questions. Or actually, I'd probably I'll wait till the end. I know we talked about doing questions at the end, so I'll wait till the end and I'll give it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll just dive right into the last segment. We have 3 homeowners and residents, Ann Flora Dwyer, Beth McAllister, and Sandy Goldberg, and they've recently spearheaded the formation of the Kirkwood Firewise community, which will give us a great opportunity to become much safer during fire season. And so I'll let them fill us in on how and what.
Great, thanks. Do we have a hard 1 o'clock stop?
No, I think if people need to leave, they will leave, and hopefully everybody can stay until all questions are answered. So
Okay,
no.
we'll try and move through this quickly. First, I want to thank Jessica Morse. So good to see you again. It's been a long time. And it's great to have you in this role to help us tackle this massive and complicated task we have ahead of us. So I'm Ann Fleur Dwyer. I'm a full-time resident here in Kirkwood. I grew up spending a lot of time in and around Kirkwood and have been a resident in the Kirkwood and Tahoe-Truckee area for about 15 years now. And I also have Beth McAllister and Sandy, who are on our Firewise committee here in Kirkwood that will be presenting with us today. And I mean, I think I want to start with what Rick just said. What do we need to do to protect and protect our community and be educated for our future wildfire risk, which is not an if, but a when. You can go to the next slide.
Perfect. That let me know that you all can see it.
Thanks. I think just a quick recap, clearly we all, this is actually a project that I had started working on in May of last year and didn't have a lot of momentum. And then the Caldor fire happened. And I think it was really a big wake up call for everybody that our community is not exempt from fire, and we do really need to take this seriously. And I think that we can also look to examples that Jessica was showing, Christmas Valley, the work they did there really did make an impact, and that we need to be working towards doing the same for our community here. So in thinking about that, the NFPA has put together a program called Firewise, which is specifically to help neighborhoods and residents become educated about what they can do and put together a plan and goals and apply for funding to make their communities more fire resistant and complete defensible space projects. And so it's the most natural avenue to really achieve those goals and get the assistance we need in doing so. There's different benefits to using that program, but we'll go into that a little bit more detail as we go through these slides. Next slide.
So the benefits of being a recognized Firewise community, obviously the first one is improving awareness and fire safety. So Firewise really helps homeowners understand how to take responsibility for making their property safer. And if you think about it, it's not just for us, it's also safer for firefighters who have to defend our properties if we can create that defensible space. Homeowners insurance is becoming a challenge, and we know that almost all of the major homeowners insurance companies have increased availability of insurance for homes that have become hardened, and also homes that are in a community that has a mitigation commitment, such as Firewise. And, for some communities that are in a high fire danger area, Firewise is the only way for them to get insurance. And so we know about half of those homeowner insurance companies offer discounts as well for a recognized Firewise community. So also, by organizing as a Firewise community, we can apply for grants that can help fund defensible space projects, such as a chipper. That would be very helpful. And otherwise, as individuals, we can't qualify to apply for grants. And we really are looking at this program to bring the entire community together for our common good. Not, as Rick mentioned, we're 3 counties. We're also 23 different HOAs. And we're all working independently, and we're not sharing knowledge and best practices, and we're not working together. So we really think this program can bring Kirkwood together. And it has broad adoption. There's over 1,500 sites nationwide across 42 states, and more than a quarter of those sites are in California, not surprising because of our wildfire situation. El Dorado County already has 18 Firewise communities, and Amador has 4. And we're really looking forward to being the first one in Alpine County. So next, we have a lot of support for the Kirkwood Firewise community. In the interest of time, I won't read off the list, but most importantly, 10, and now recently we've learned 11 of the HOAs in the community, which is more than 60% of homes now have agreed to participate in Firewise. So we definitely have the support.
Sorry, I got to unmute. So the first step that, well, beyond having reached out to all of these different HOAs and agencies to gather the support and knowledge that we will need to move this project forward, we're working on completing the initial application for Firewise. And so as part of that, we have to put together a description of the community and an assessment of basically the current state of affairs as far as defensible space goes and home hardening in our community. That kind of gives us a baseline to then develop action plans and goals to work from. We don't actually have to meet any of those goals to apply and begin the process. We need to set goals, and then over the years and yearly submittal of showing what work we're working on, show that we're working towards achieving those goals and making progress. So this is not you need to do all of the work before you can be recognized. This is acknowledging that there's work to be done, assessing what needs to be done and making a plan to work on it. And then over the course of the coming years, showing that we are working towards meeting those goals. I think that may have covered what's on this slide. Okay, frequently asked questions. So why do we need Firewise? Can't we just rely on CAL FIRE to perform inspections? So as owners of property in a high fire danger zone, we are required to maintain our defensible space around our structures. CAL FIRE is legally responsible to perform the inspections and issue findings. They're done on a periodically and on a rolling basis. I know last summer, not this past summer, but the summer before that, I believe that they did come through our valley, and some people may have received a notice with items that they needed to address. But they are not able to do that for the entire jurisdiction that they cover on a regular basis. And so we really need to step up and make sure that we're doing the work ourselves. And so the Firewise program, it's voluntary, but it helps us to organize, educate, and proactively mitigate our fire risk. And it doesn't take the place of CAL FIRE's enforcement role. It's a voluntary and collaborative partnership with them, and helps us achieve the things that they will be asking of us, but does not necessarily, there's no, Firewise committee itself does not have any legal ramifications as far as being able to force you to comply. This is all voluntary and based on educating our community and helping our community achieve a more fire safe space.
I'll take the next one. One of the questions is, I can't create defensible space because of the Kirkwood tree ordinance. And this was brought up actually in February of 2020. And unfortunately, it was right before COVID had kind of shut things down, and these minutes never got captured. But the Firewise committee has brought it up again to TriTac. And the conclusion anyway from that meeting was that the state law, I mean, we're required by law to create defensible space, but the state law, PRC 4291, overrides the Kirkwood tree ordinance. And tree removal permits are not required to comply with defensible space. So there is a recognition with TriTech that there is this perceived conflict. So they've committed now to review the tree ordinance, and if either issue guidance for us or update it at their next meeting on December 10th. And we've asked them to address defensible space, tree removal for defensible space, a tree size exemption from any permit. Right now, there's no exemption, no tree size exemption. We've also asked for them to look at vegetation management on undeveloped lots. And I know there's kind of a gap because PRC 4291 involves structures and maintaining defensible space around your structure. So what happens when there's a lot with no structure on it? And both Alpine County and El Dorado County actually do have ordinances for vegetation management on those undeveloped lots. So we've asked for that to be addressed as well for Kirkwood. And, by organizing even as a committee, we were able to get that done. And so after that, the HOAs who have individual tree removal guidelines will have to, they'll be able to update their guidelines and provide definitely more guidance on how we can meet the law for defensible space. So go ahead, Anne-Fleur.
This is another question that we've received a lot is the way the Firewise program is set up is in order to be recognized for each year, you submit 1 volunteer hour per residential unit. And there's a currency equivalent of $28 and some cents for those volunteer hours. So, and I think that some people have translated that into every single person has to spend time doing this. But that's not the case. Participation is voluntary. As an entire community, we need to show that we have put that much effort into this. But there are so many different ways to achieve that, whether it's by financial contributions to projects for defensible space or volunteer days or just doing defensible space on your own property, that as a collective, we need to gather that much effort into doing this. And if as a collective, we are unable to do that one year, then we aren't recognized for that year as a Firewise community and we can try again the following year. There really isn't any punishment or way that retribution to not being able to meet that commitment. And it's not a requirement that every single person contributes. Obviously, the more people contribute, the safer our community will be in the long run. But there are place certain properties and potentially certain people that will not be able to participate, and that's why we are working together as a community. So our proposed timeline for our Firewise application is to submit it in early 2022 so that we can receive approval in the spring of 2022 and begin education and defensible space improvements as soon as the snow melts in summer of 2022. And I mean, some defensible space can be done with snow on the ground. We've been hearing about people that use the 10 feet of snow on the ground to get to higher ladder fuels on trees. And there's no reason you have to wait for the snow to be gone to be able to start working on this. And then we'll also be able to apply for grants once we are a Firewise recognized community from many different sources, some of which Jessica Morse mentioned. The Fire Safe Councils in Amador County and El Dorado County also have grants that they have received to share with Firewise communities to work on these projects. Beth, did you want to take this one?
Sure. So how can you help? Please contact your HOA president and tell them that you support Kirkwood becoming a recognized Firewise community. become informed in the meantime. So I know right now we have a little break that we don't have to really worry about fire until the summer comes. But the more you can learn ahead of time, we are going to have community outreach and education, but there's a lot of publications. So the first one is the NFPA. And I know Sandy also typed into the chat. There's very good publications from the California Fire Safe Council, and there's like brochures, and that's in the chat, as well as CAL FIRE has a lot of good information. So the more that you can educate yourself in the meantime, until we roll out the program in the spring. And then also please volunteer for community outreach and fire mitigation projects in 2022. So thank you for your support. We're going to move forward regardless of, I guess, and Flora, that's important, regardless of how many HOAs. I mean, the program is moving forward. It's not an if, it's this is the plan.
Yes, and I would add that if your HOA is not on board right away, we can always add them. Just because you're not part of the original group of HOAs that submit the initial application, it does not mean that we can't add more HOAs and or properties to our FireWise community as we continue moving forward. So
in the annual renewal.
Yeah.
Right, we can update and add HOAs. Yes.
Yes. All right.
Thank you guys so much. This FireWise opportunity is really, really important for Kirkwood. I'm wondering if people have questions that they want to ask that they don't get to ask today to you guys about FireWise. Is there an email address or something that they can reach out, or basically should they just get informed and wait until education programs start in the spring?
Yes, so I'm happy to give you mine. It's BA McAllis@outlook.com. We can send it out afterwards. We can ask Bob Epstein or Jessica to send those out. And if we don't get to answer all the questions, I can help answer those and we can send those out. We can send out the answers. I know someone asked which are the 10 Kirkwood HOAs that are part of FireWise, and we could answer that.
Do you mind typing your email into the chat? Just
sure.
Thanks, Beth.
So I'll also be sending out a community notice after this with a link to the recording that I'm going to post on kmpud.com, and we could include an email address in that as well.
Well, we have some remaining questions. So I know we've gone over because there's so much good information. So I see that lots of people are still here, which is fantastic. So if it's okay, I thought I would just pose the remaining questions, and Rick or Beth or Ann Fleur, if you guys have answers, please speak up. We have a question about, and this might be, Jessica did have to leave at 1. So this might be a question specifically for her, but Rick, maybe you know the answer. How do you volunteer to get involved in prescribed burns or reforestation efforts? Where do you apply?
I am not familiar with that. I would assume you'd start with your local U.S. Forest Service office and ask them that question. So I would defer to U.S. Forest Service first.
Okay, thank you. Next question. The Sacramento Bee article on lawsuit delays made the tree thinning program appear impossible. Is this being addressed? This also might be a Jessica question, but. Yes, Jessica question. Okay, I'm sorry that we didn't get time for that question while she was still here. This question was addressed with FireWise presentation, but the question about will interventions affect insurance premiums, and as Beth and Ann Fleur stated, being certified as a FireWise community, it has a good chance of helping us to get fire insurance or to keep our fire insurance. But if anybody wants to speak more to that, please feel free.
Yeah, and so insurance companies have been able to raise their premiums because of the loss of structures, because of wildfires recently. And so that's been approved, there by the Insurance Commission. And one of the ways that they're mitigating those increases in premiums is by giving discounts for Firewise communities. So that's where we can really help ourselves by becoming a Firewise community.
That's great. And another question was similar, but also asked, how do we lower the overall fire hazard risk at Kirkwood? And for sure, the work that we would do through Firewise does that because people are hardening their homes. But is there anything else besides that, Rick, that we can do to lower the overall fire risk at Kirkwood?
No, I think supporting the Firewise program and continuing defensible space and education to everyone will certainly benefit. And then circling back to the insurance question, Kirkwood's unique. We have an ISO rating of 4, where if you were out in the rural part of the county, the rating would be a 10. And so we do get a break now with our insurance. However, unfortunately, because of our location, I think sometimes the insurance companies are hesitant to really acknowledge that. And if you don't already know it, if there is a major large fire event happening near your home, or if your home's under some type of a warning, you're not allowed, the insurance companies will not allow you to adjust your insurance rates up or down. So if you've done a remodel or an addition and just forgot to add it to your insurance company, you have to think about that way before there's a fire near your home, or you could be told no. So that's just something else related to insurance that I think some people aren't aware of. Or if you're trying to sell your home, sometimes they'll suspend the sale until the fire risk is below or above like 99%.
Thank you. Next question is, what about trees that are on Forest Service land but within defensible space of our condo?
Yeah, so I think what I talked about, the tree removal guidelines, we don't have the right to go beyond our property for defensible space. We're required to do that up to our property line. But the other ordinances, we're hoping that gets addressed by TriTac, because 2 counties already do have ordinances to address what happens if there's something not on your property that's in the adjacent property, and that's the fuels reduction management ordinance. So we're hoping that TriTac will help address that and what we could do about it.
Yeah, there are certain places, and I think this is what Beth is alluding to, where you are allowed to do defensible space for 100 feet around your residence, even beyond your property line. And so I think that's something that we're trying to get the agencies to work on updating. And then in Forest Service land specifically, I'm not exactly sure how that boundary is dealt with. However, we are also trying to work with Forest Service to get them to come and do more defensible space work and set up some of those fire breaks like Jessica was talking about that were completed around Christmas Valley, around our valley, that are on their land, because clearly chances of a wildfire coming and impacting our valley is going to be based off of the density of the Forest Service land around us. So definitely something that we also need to keep working with the Forest Service on trying to get them to address.
Thank you. The next question is about a new chipper. Can we get a grant for that through Firewise or question mark?
Rick might have more information on this too. I know that the PUD is working on looking at their chipper program. I'm not exactly sure where that's at, but it is potentially something that we could get funding through the Firewise committee to maybe buy one for the PUD or hire the PUD to have it available for FireWise programs, in which case that funding could help go towards purchasing one. So I think there's it's definitely something being talked about and mechanisms to get there. Rick, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we've enjoyed having a chipper here for many years, but it's not just the purchase of the chipper, it's actually having the labor and running that program. And so these things are currently being discussed with the KMPUD, and I'm glad that FireWise is willing to support and possibly fund. So.
Thank you. Okay, we have just a few more questions. I can answer this one. Will this presentation be available for homeowners to watch on their own? And yes, it will be posted on the PUD website, so you can watch it at your leisure as many times as you want. Okay, next question. Where do I get the regulations for defensible space to show the HOA?
Oh, you mean the Public Resources Code?
I'm actually not sure.
Yeah, so the Public Resources Code it's the state law. I can send out the link to the Public Resources Code. And we've also put the links in for all of the brochures about defensible space, but the law itself, I can send a link to that. If you want the language of the law for PRC 4291.
Thank you. Next question. A very important aspect to FireWise and fire protection is communicating evacuation orders. Code Red is the primary method, but is not always reliable. Is the Kirkwood FireWise Council addressing this issue?
Yeah, so part of the FireWise committee action plans, it's broken up into 3 sections. One is education, one is defensible space on private properties, and another one is on common properties. And as part of that entire plan, emergency preparedness plans, communication, doing community evacuation drills is part of the scope of work that is identified in the FireWise plans and action goals, and is something that we have just started talking to the PUD about, working together on developing these plans for long-term and more seamless operations in the future.
Thank you. And there's just one last question, just a clarification. Could being part of FireWise negatively affect insurance if there is a year we do not qualify?
So for the insurance companies I have spoken to directly about this, provide a 10% discount on your insurance for a given year. So if we are not recognized in a given year, you would not get that 10% discount or whatever special discount your insurance company would provide for being in a FireWise recognized community.
Yeah, and in some cases it's a 20% discount, and it may only be a 5% discount. Every insurance company is different, but agree.
Vale, I was just seeing this question pop up here. Sorry, and jumping the gun on your questions. Vale, we are hoping to have Vale participate and are still working on that.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists. I'm sorry, Jessica Morse isn't here for me to thank again, but Rick and Beth and Ann Fleur and Sandy, I know you were typing away in the background. Thank you guys all so very much for educating us and giving us opportunities to help out and keeping us safe. Our next fire safety seminar will be on February the 17th. And again, this one has been recorded. So if you'd like to see it again or recommend it to friends and neighbors, that would be great. And I just want to close by reminding the 3 calls to action. 1, remember to encourage your HOA to sign up to be part of the FireWise community. It will really help the whole community. 2, become knowledgeable and aware of all the ways you can harden your home and create defensible space. And 3, continue your amazing support of the Kirkwood Volunteer Fire Department. And thank you so much, everyone. we'll see you next time.
Thank you.